Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started tonight. I know you're all anxious to hear Kasey's presentation and then to step outside and have some refreshments and some food. So I'd like to welcome you. My name is Joyce Kennedy and I'm the Director of Community Relations here at Concordia College. So just going to take a couple minutes to introduce Kasey and then I'll turn the mic over to her. To say Broken Bow Brewery is a family affair is really an understatement. Launched in 2013 by all 5 members of the LaMothe family, Broken Bow has become the beer of choice for thousands of craft beer aficionados. Even the name Broken Bow has a familial meaning. It's a small town in Nebraska where Kasey's mom grew up. Broken Bow's motto, "If it ain't broken, don't drink it," is really pure marketing genius. When Kasey was studying at Carnegie Mellon University, earning a BS in biological sciences, she was still deciding on her career path. By the time she graduated in 2013, the family hobby of brewing beer was quickly turning into a business. Each family member had a specific role to fill, and Kasey's science background landed her perfectly into quality control. The Broken Bow team includes Mike, Kasey's big brother and head brewer, her dad Lyle, who's with us here tonight, he's in charge of sales, her older sister Kristen, who is the event and marketing guru, Kasey, who is head of quality control and also a brewer, and their mom, Kathy, who heads up HR, does accounting, and generally keeps a place running smoothly, like moms always do. Kasey takes her role as a brewer very seriously. Not long after Broken Bow opened, Kasey attended the World Brewing Academy in Chicago, earning an associate degree in advanced brewing. Kasey is also a certified beer server, which is the first of 4 levels of certification to become an advanced cicerone, which in the beer world is equivalent to a wine sommelier. Kasey is going to talk tonight about the craft brewing business and what it takes to be successful. Following a presentation and Q&As, we will move out into the lobby for the beer tasting and food pairing, which she developed exclusively for this event. But before handing the mic over to Kasey, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mike Kuzo, who's the class of 2008 here at Concordia, and owner of Tucked Away Restaurant in Tuckahoe, New York, which, by the way, also sells Broken Bow Brew, for donating the very large trays of wings out there that you'll be sampling tonight as well. And also Vinny Fasano, who's on our Chartwell's team, for preparing the rest of the food. So now let's give a big Concordia welcome to Kasey LaMothe of Broken Bow Brewery.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Joyce, for that introduction, and thank all of you guys for coming here on your Thursday night. So I have a really tough job. I have to taste beer every single day. It's really hard for me, so I want to thank you guys for helping with quality control tonight, making sure everything's on point. So I'm going to keep it pretty casual. We're talking about beer. It's fun. It's sociable, but it is also very technical once you get into it. So to start off, is anyone here a home brewer? Nobody. Wow, this never happens. Okay. All right, do I have any beer lovers? All right, there are the hands. All right, now who of you do I need to convince to be a beer lover tonight? Anybody? Excellent, okay. And last question, the hardest one. Who has been to Broken Bow? All right, excellent. Well, thank you guys for coming by. Everyone else, I want to welcome you to come by later. Okay, so I am going to start out kind of talking about the family. After all, it is a family affair. So this is the 5 of us. My brother all the way to the left, my mom, dad, and my sister and myself. So this is in front of one of our tanks when we got the renovation, the new tank installed about a year ago. So that's us. Okay, so to kind of explain who we are, what we do in a nutshell, I have a video. It is our first video that we ever did. It is about 3 years old, so the brewery looks completely different for those of you who have come here. So it's kind of fun for me to look back on, but I think it'll be helpful for you guys to learn a little bit about us.
Brewing started about 10 years ago. I had a little too much time on my hands, ordered up a kit online, showed up a couple weeks later and made my first batch of beer, a simple one, just using extracts on the stove in my apartment in Stamford. I broke the stove on that first batch. It wasn't really rated for that kind of weight, but I was stuck immediately afterwards. I had to keep on brewing. And once I realized I needed a little bit more space, bigger stove, naturally, called up my dad and dragged him into it as well so I could use his house. And it just slowly morphed. That generally meant I had to get some more equipment that would let me control the process better. And I got more equipment. The batches got bigger to improve consistency, and it just happened.
When we found this place, it was a winner, right? When we pulled up, Lyle and I were here that day. The street, the building, it was an empty shell. It was perfect. We knew from that point that we wanted to start this journey here. The building, although at the time was a disaster, it had really good bones. So the design part wasn't very hard. It was just more finding the right pieces to bring everything together.
Building process was multi-dimensional. And it had to be done simultaneously. So we looked for a location, the one that we're sitting in, simultaneous to finding the equipment, which we found this beautiful German brew house and fermentation system actually over 2 hours north of Tokyo in Hime, Japan. We brought that over, and that was simultaneous to doing all of the legal work, the paperwork, the trademarking, the branding. And so I would describe the building process coming out of the ground as multi-pronged, and I thank God that we had 5 family members that were capable of going off in each direction.
I love the fact that we do it with our own hands in a brewery that the 5 of us built.
A lot of people, when they ask, okay, so it's family owned and operated, but what does that really mean? Well, usually it's like, oh, me and my dad, or me and my mom, me and my brother or sister. But when I get asked that question and I keep going on and on of all the family members that are actually involved, it really kind of wows people because they don't expect the whole family.
Our styles are reflective as homebrewers of what it was that we enjoyed originally. After all, we brewed for ourselves. So we have the darker styles, like the stout and the nut brown, because Michael really enjoys that style of beer. Me, I self-describe the family hotbed. And so I like the IPAs, I love the APAs. Other family members really like the lighter, crisp, clear quality of your lagers or your pilsners or your hefeweizens. And so, in essence, our recipe book developed around personal taste. When we opened, we didn't know what the public was going to like, so we put 6 styles on, and 3 came right to the fore. We'll always mix our styles up, but our APA, our lager, our stout are all developing very nice follow.
Mom drinking a beer. Okay. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. So now that we know a little bit about Broken Bow, let's get to the heart of it and talk about beer. So a little bit about the history of beer. It's one of the oldest beverages. Let's also watch another video. Okay. So it's one of the oldest beverages. It can be traced back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. There are, I won't say rumors, but I don't know if it's a fact because I wasn't around at the time, but apparently the slaves that made the ancient pyramids in Giza they were paid with beer. So it traced way back. There's a bunch of evidence. There's evidence that it was on Noah's Ark. So he was having a great time, apparently. So it's very old. Basically, when these civilizations had their grain, it started fermenting, and it kind of just happened spontaneously. So each location had a different version of beer, but everyone kind of had their own beer. So for instance, in Asia, you would have beer that was made with rice, and now it's sake, but that's what it was. It also used to have different spices in it because they thought that would kind of keep it fresher for longer. Turns out hops do a better job of that, so that's why we use hops. But it's kind of goes right in line with spices. And then before the Middle Ages, women were the ones that were the brewers. So that's not as true today. But it was considered something for festivals and part of the food, and the women prepared all of that. So of course they're going to make the beer. So kind of interesting. All right. Main 4 ingredients. Who can list them? Just shout them out. Hops, yeah. Water. Yeast. Grain. Excellent. Okay. So we're going to start with the water. So water is very, very important, as with most other products. It makes up 90% of the volume of beer. And it can actually really impact the flavor of whatever beer you're consuming. So there are different minerals in water, such as calcium, magnesium, chloride, that can affect the pH. It can affect the stability of the beer. It can affect other ingredients like the yeast. There's not enough magnesium in the water, and therefore in the beer, yeast doesn't perform very well. So there are a lot of places that are very well known for their beer, such as Denver, Belgium. New York is becoming one of them, and that is mostly because of the water, because it's so pure. And that is essentially because it's really easy to add calcium or magnesium or chloride than to take it out. It's very expensive, very hard to do, so we like very pure water. Okay, the grain. So I have here 3 different kinds, and I'm going to pass out. Yeah. So these are different kinds of grain. As you can tell, what? Yes, please eat it. Yeah. Don't grab too many just because they're really, really crunchy and hard to chew on. But yes, definitely try them. So the grain is responsible for these 3 things. When we talk about grain in brewing, we are normally talking about barley, rye, wheat. A lot of people say, well, where does malt come in? I've heard of malt, but what really is that? So the malting process actually makes barley start its germination process, and it packs it full of starches that we then as brewers use later. And it cuts it off so that it doesn't actually continue on with that process. And it's called malt. So the 3 styles that I passed around, one is pale. I believe that's that one. It is the lightest in color. It's pretty easy to figure that one out. That is a base malt, so we use it in most of our beers. That's us installing our silo, which is, when it's full, it's 40,000 pounds of that. So you can see it when you drive past on Marbledale. It's pretty hard to miss. So, but that we use it as pale because it doesn't really contribute a lot of flavor, which is nice for a base, and it contributes a lot of sugar, which I'll tell you about later, but that is something that we need. The second one is the crystal, which is a little darker in color. It has kind of a nutty caramel flavor to it. You can find that in a variety of beers. It kind of just gets put in. And then the chocolate, which is the last one, and I think the most easily found. And that is it's kind of cocoa-y, I would say. It's not as chocolatey as you would expect it to be, but it has kind of that nutty flavor to it, kind of roasty. That one you will find in your porters and your stouts and your dark beers. So that's how the color and flavor kind of relate to each other. And then lastly, the alcohol content. So the grain has starch in it, and that starch gets converted to sugar. That sugar then gets fermented, and that process gives you alcohol. So the more grain that you have, the more starch, more everything, more alcohol. So that's how those are related. Okay, so before I start passing around these hops so that I don't have to keep smelling them, who can tell me what state had the highest amount of hops being grown pre-Prohibition? Any guesses? No? New York. So New York was actually very well known for its hops. And then there was a big issue with all the crops, and they all died, and then hops were no more. And then they tried it again, kind of tried reviving it, same thing, didn't work. They finally, all the farmers are saying, well, there's so much, the craft industry is booming. Why can't we get these hops to grow and grow well? So it's reviving again. It's going really well. The interesting thing about hops is that it actually takes 3 years for it to be useful in beer. So it is definitely an investment for those farmers to say, okay, well, 3 years from now, I'll be able to sell these. So a lot of them are starting next year. They'll start to be able to do it. So New York is going to be very well known for its hops again, which is exciting. So hops are grown all around the world. They're grown in Australia, they're grown in Europe, they're grown here in the Pacific Northwest is what we're mostly known for. And that is, each place kind of has their styles that they're known for, their signature flavors, if you will. And Europe is known kind of more for the traditional hops, the not overly anything, because that's kind of what their beer is. Australia has really juicy hops, and the hops that are kind of rare and like the hot ones right now usually come from Australia. We are known for kind of a citrus piney flavor. So I actually have a few hop styles up there, hop flavors: Cascade, Citra Amarillo, Centennial, and Simcoe, all grown in the US, all fairly well known. Cascade is in a ton of US brews. So I'm sure you guys have had some of these, if not all of these. So why do we add hops? They are useful for the flavor, the aroma, and the bitterness in beer. So depending on when you add them in the process, they will contribute something different. It's kind of cool because specifically in the brewing process, you can even add them at different times. And I could add Centennial at one time and get the flavor of it. And then I'll add it half an hour later and get the aroma, which is kind of cool and kind of fun to play around with. And then finally, it helps with shelf life. So hops have an antibacterial property, so it keeps the beer better for longer, which is why they originally moved from spices to hops. And IPAs, I'm sure everyone has heard of it, if not had it. So an IPA is actually an India Pale Ale. It got its name because it was packed with hops, and it actually made the journey from England to India on a ship, and all the sailors were used to beer going bad by the end of this trip because it was really long and the beer didn't last. And then finally hops went in it, and all of a sudden it lasted. I'm sure they had a big party about it, but that's the IPA. So every single beer has hops in it, whether or not you realize it. Some highlight it a little bit more, some don't. But even your lagers, where, I mean, you could drink a Budweiser, it has hops in it. It's crazy. But that's also one of the main differences between craft and macro is the hops, because most of the big guys are lagers, and you can't taste that as much. And the hops are really, really expensive, especially those Australian ones. So I'm going to pass these around. Do not eat these. You will wreck your palate for the next week. So I'm going to pass this one. This is CTZ. So it's going to be a little floral, but really kind of sharp. You can even take some and rub it between your fingers. It kind of is sticky, but you get more of the essence of it. And then that one's Cascade. That one's really citrusy. It's the smell really sticks to you, so for better or worse. But they are very fragrant, which is a pretty cool aspect. Okay. So the final ingredient, which some people say is not an ingredient because it's a living thing, but it is yeast. It is kind of the MVP of the ingredient list. It is what actually makes beer into beer. So without yeast, we would just have malt and water, and we would all be really sad. So, so the yeast creates alcohol. So through that fermentation process, it will take the sugars that is provided by the grain. It will then turn it into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and some various flavors. So that carbonation that CO2 can actually carbonate the beer if you keep it in the tank and keep it all in the same environment. And then it can also obviously creates alcohol as well. And it also drives down that like sugary water, which is called wort. It's kind of like pre-beer. So if you have a beer, or if you have wort on the first day of fermentation, it's just really sugary. It's really hard to taste. So we are very thankful for yeast getting rid of all that sugar. And then lastly, it also contributes flavors. So it can contribute kind of like spicy flavors, like you can see in Belgian beers. So that is mostly because of the yeast. And then it can also even produce apple or banana flavors if it's not treated correctly. So it has a wide range. You need to be very nice to it, love it, talk to it. It's very, very particular, but it has a really hard job. So I guess it deserves it. And then sour beer. Sour beer is kind of a new craze. At least it's becoming a new craze. And at first, it's kind of like, well, why do I want my beer to be sour? That doesn't sound very good. But I think it's kind of cool. It's kind of a movement to make something good out of something bad. So it used to be where you would have this beer that got contaminated and that wasn't what you wanted, and down the drain it goes. Well, now as brewers, you can say, okay, well, this is what this yeast or this bacteria is going to do to my beer. What flavors do I want to put in it? And kind of control how much of that bacteria or that yeast can go in it. So there are a few different types. Brettanomyces, Brett, as it's commonly referred to, is one of them. You may have heard of it. That creates kind of like a farm hay flavor, which sounds kind of weird, but it can be delicious. And then Lactobacillus, Pediococcus. There are a few that kind of pop up, or even wild yeast. You can just open the tank, see what happens. And it's really scary, but but it's also kind of cool to see what comes. So that's sour beer. That's my new favorite. So okay. So how is beer made? We have all the ingredients now. How does it actually come together? So this is a picture of our brew house. This is where the magic happens, more or less. This is where the wort, pre-beer, as I call it, is actually made. So this first kind of set is the milling, mashing, and boiling. So the milling happens off to the side. Basically, you have a mill, and it finally cracks open that grain, which makes it susceptible and easily converted into sugar, all those starches converted into sugars. So it drops into the top of this left tank, the taller one. That's called the mash tun. So in there's that finely cracked open grain and really hot water. And that hot water basically extracts all of the sugars from it. And so this sugar water, wort, gets transferred through all those pipes and onto the right, the smaller tank, which is called the boil kettle. It's a pretty self-explanatory tank. It boils in here. And this is where the hops get added. So as I was saying before, you can add them at different times. And it's also really nice because we don't have to worry about anything we do prior to this step, because when you're boiling something for an hour, nothing is coming out of it. So it's in beer, we really have to worry about what is getting in. You have to sanitize everything because anything will spoil the whole batch. So that's the nice part for us, is getting rid of it. And then we hop over to the cellar. So this big tank right here, it's not actually that big, but that's the fermenter. So this is where fermentation happens. Brewers are not very creative with their names. They're pretty self-explanatory. So this is where fermentation happens. The wort, on its way from the boil kettle, which we just saw, gets cooled down. And it then transfers into this fermenter. The wort, or the yeast, gets pitched, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying it gets put in the tank. And then it ferments. And you let it sit for a while, make sure the temperatures are correct, everything is good and happy inside, and kind of let it go to work. Then once you're done with that, you need to carbonate it. So you transfer it over to the tanks on the right. Those are called the bright tanks. That's where you can carbonate it. And I should also note that in any process that I've said up until now, you can put additives in there. So for example, we have our Broken Stinger, which is coming out soon. It's a honey ale. So we're going to put that honey in when it's boiling, actually. We have our Lucy Sour Strawberry Wheat. The strawberries go into the brights. So it really depends on what you want to get out of it, what flavors, how much, if you want it to ferment, if you don't want it to ferment, which is a really big one with honey because it's so sweet. It has so much sugar to it. So it makes it kind of fun to play around with that. Okay, so then aging it. Do you age or don't you age? Generally speaking, IPAs, anything with hops, do not age. Drink it as fresh as you possibly can. The hops will kind of just drop out. It won't be bad, it just won't be as good as it could be. So those ones are kind of just, that's always the case. With all your other beers, you can or you can't. It kind of just depends on what the style is. So this is a picture of our barrel room. We have a barley wine that's aged for 9 months in a mixture of rye whiskey barrels, bourbon barrels, and red wine, and then combined again. So we like to kind of play around with it. It takes a lot of care in making sure that you're treating it right because it's sitting out for 9 months. But it's kind of interesting too because you can immediately get that flavor. So we age it for 9 months to kind of smooth it out. You could put it one day and taste it and you'll already taste the barrel, which is pretty cool. You can taste if there's alcohol in it. You can taste the wood, you can taste the char. It's pretty cool. So that's also a fun thing to play around with. And then finally, there's packaging. What good is it if you can't drink it? So, so we do it all at Broken Bow. We do kegs, so you can find it on tap. We do canning. That's a picture of our old canning machine. We have a newer one now, but those are stouts getting canned. And then we do bottling also. We do large format bottles. So we do it all. We like to obviously play around. So ales versus lagers. This is a question that a lot of people have, especially because a lager you know of and an ale is like, well, is that an IPA or where does stout fall? So everything is either an ale or it's a lager, and that depends on the yeast. So ales have the yeast that sits on the top and ferments there, and it ferments at warmer temperatures, versus lagers, which has the yeast ferment at the bottom at cooler temperatures. And it's just the difference in the yeast, but that is what separates them. So this is obviously a picture of our cans. The lager and actually the Oktoberfest are both lagers, which is a little interesting. But everyone falls in one of those categories. So the lagers are basically your crisp, clean, easy drinking, sitting outside on a summer day, you want a beer, that's a lager. So these are the two lagers that we brought for you today, our Broken Auger lager and our Bach Breaker. Both are lagers. We have a nice picture of some wings there to get you guys all warmed up for later. The Bach Breaker is a little heartier. It's kind of our winter lager is how we call it. And it has a little more malt to it. It's a little higher in ABV. And it has kind of just a little bit more flavor to it. It's a winter lager for a reason. It's not that like easily crushable drink, but it is nice to just sit and relax. And I think that's my favorite one that we have on tap right now. And then the ales that I brought. So the ales are generally I won't say more flavorful because that puts down lagers, but they are the more kind of more interesting, intricate ones. So, and the majority of beer is ales. So we have the Broken Heart Stout, which is, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the stout. Everyone thinks of Guinness immediately. It is kind of a roasty, toasty, chocolate, coffee flavor to it. We have the Mosaic Amarillo IPA. So our IPA series, we try and take 1 or 2 hops and highlight them. So today it's the Mosaic and Amarillo. So those are the 2 hops that we put in. And we do this because we like to highlight that different staging of putting it in. So it is only with these 2 hops, and you can kind of get the complexity even though it's just 2 hops. And then we have the red ale, which is one of our more popular ones. It is very kind of caramelly, toffee, bready, really, really good. It pairs with basically anything on this planet, which is kind of why it's the most popular, because every restaurant loves it because it tastes really good. And then our Nick's Hazelnut Praline Porter. It's our newest award-winning beer. We just won an award for it, I guess, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It is a porter, so it's also a dark beer. It has hazelnut praline in it, so it's kind of that nutty flavor to it. It's really good. It does obviously have nuts, so if you have nut allergies, please do not try it. But if you don't, please do try it. The stout and the porter, they always feel left out because everyone thinks like it's dark, it's heavy, it's scary, but they're not as intimidating as they seem. They're very good. So kind of the point of tonight is to have everyone try everything. It's going to be little samples so you can and don't feel intimidated by those dark beers. Okay, and then kind of before questions, just going over the pairing a little bit. I am going to be out there, so ask as many questions about beer or pairing or anything. But this is kind of the general guidelines for doing a pairing. So you always want to do lightest to heaviest, and as the preparer of the pairing, you get to decide what that means. So you can say, I want lightest to darkest, I want lowest ABV to highest ABV, I want most flavorful to, or least flavorful to most flavorful, whatever your heart desires, that's what you can do. Just do it in the right order. And then these are the 3 C's of pairing. I mean, they all make sense. I think that the most obvious one is complementing, so similar flavors, similar characteristics. We have our porter and chocolate chip cookies. It's a pretty easy one. They go hand in hand. And then a little bit more interesting, cutting. So you can use the beer's bitterness or its carbonation to cut through whatever you're gonna taste and kind of like cleanse the palate with it. So what we have is we have the lager and pepperoni. So you have that kind of bubbly flavor of the lager, the higher carbonation, kind of tingly on your tongue to cut through the spicy of the pepperoni, and it kind of evens out, and it's pretty cool. And then lastly, you have contrasting. It's beer. It's true in beer, opposites attract. So stout and oysters. It's a weird one to me, but it works. You have oyster stouts, and it's kind of a sweet and salty type of thing. So what we have today is the stout and some salted nuts. So it's a little bit of contrast. It's also a little bit of complementing because the nuts and the stout. But so I invite all of you guys to try these. Try everything. Try every combination. I think the best part about pairing is to talk amongst each other and say, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried this? And everyone's palate is different. And what I think is really great, someone thinks is really terrible, and vice versa. And it's really cool to talk about it. And you can also see, like, if I pair a lager with oysters or with mixed nuts or whatever, and it's terrible, it's kind of cool because at the end of the day, you can just take another sip of the beer and it's fine. But it's kind of cool to see how things really do pair well or they don't. So that's what I have. I would love to see
Out of curiosity, how do you guys go about naming your beers and stuff?
So in the very beginning, we decided to go with this whole broken theme. So we have the Broken Heart Stout, the Broken Auger Lager, and we had a full list of just broken everything. And then it started getting weird, and it was like Broken Glass IPA, and you're like, why do I want to drink that? That doesn't sound good. And then it started getting kind of depressing, and it went all over the place, but there are some pretty witty names in there. So that's kind of how it started, and then sometimes a beer becomes a beer because you say, I have this really great name and we need to do this. Or sometimes it happens and we're like, we're releasing this tomorrow. We need a name for this. So someone just make up a name. I don't care what it is. And sometimes it just comes to you. It's we have so the Lucy Sour Strawberry Wheat and the Nick's Hazelnut Praline Porter are named after my niece and nephew. And I have another niece and another nephew. And so they're getting their own beers as well. So we have like a little series. But my nephew is, 7? He's 7? And he's Nick. He just won the big award. And so he calls, he's really excited, and he's like, so I'll take like a penny or dime for everyone that you sell. And we're like, no, you will not. But now he's telling his brother, like, your beer is not going to be as good as mine. So sorry to set you up for failure. But so those ones kind of just came to life, and we based the beer off of the kid. And so those ones are pretty fun to do, but it all depends. Yeah?
You mentioned that New York water is really good. Mm-hmm. Do you use it straight from the tap, or do you filter it?
So we filter it. You can use it straight from the tap. We just go overboard. But a lot of people do because it's so pure. We like to make sure there is literally nothing in it. A lot of the styles, so like for instance, the red is not an Irish red because it's not brewed in Ireland, and the styles are really strict about that. And most of that is because of the water content. So some of the styles have to be brewed. It's kind of like champagne, needs to be brewed there for various reasons. So we try and match what their water is like, so that helps us knowing there's nothing in ours, rather than getting reports and figuring out like, okay, we need to add this, whatever. So you can, but we filter it more. Yeah.
You also do the aging in barrels that were bourbon and so on. So once you've aged the beer, then are you then able to reuse those barrels, or do you have to go with a whole new set from the previous? So
it depends. Some of them, every barrel is different, which makes it really cool and really hard. So that barley wine, we had probably 50 barrels. And every single one, you had to smell it, you had to taste it, you had to make sure, because it's all getting blended back together. So if one is soured, your whole batch is soured if it ends up. So each one you have to treat very like, okay, are we going to use this again? Are there leaks? Is there any sort of off flavor, off smell, anything? And then it really depends on how quickly you drain it and fill it. If it's just sitting there for a while, it's not worth it. But if the batch coming out of it is really, really flavorful, then you can think about maybe I'll do another one. And then some also you use just for the wood flavor, the wood characteristics. You don't care about what was in it, so you can sanitize it, steam it out, nothing's in there, fill it again, and you still get that wood. Yeah.
How do you manage demand? Do you have surges when you need a lot of beer, or that you produce too much too quickly? Or
Yeah, it's a fun game doing that. Beer is really hard because it takes so much time in advance to make it. So right now we're making beers for 2-3 weeks out, and it is hard. The Nick all of a sudden got an award, and we were going to brew one more. No, that was going to be our last batch. We had it in the tank, ready to go. That was going to be it, and now it's already gone. We've already brewed another one, and it's kind of like, well, this is great, but we didn't plan on making this, so our whole schedule's messed up now. So it's a little bit of give and take. Sometimes I go into my dad's office and say, okay, we're out of cold room space, and I need this tank cleared, so you need to get to the Centennial IPA, and that just needs gone. Or we'll kind of target what we need, but it's very tough to try and kind of project that, and especially with the cold kind of, well, not today, but it's supposedly warming up a little bit, so people want those lagers, and the stouts and the porters are kind of old news now. But then you win an award on a porter, and it's not old news anymore. So it's tough. It's tough to figure out. Anything else? Yeah.
I have a fermentation question.
Yeah,
and you can
please.
say that it's secret if you can't answer.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the honey ale.
Uh-huh.
And so it's really hard to stop a fermentation process once it's going, right? You gotta have it to completion. So, but you're adding your honey before you even add your yeast.
Yeah.
So how do you quality control your sugar levels
You account for it. You do what? You account for it. So you just basically assume this much sugar is going to be added, and so you adjust your grain bill to make that still happen. No, the yeast does its thing. You can, I mean, if you wanted to, you could. We have a pretty good yeast that kind of is pretty crisp and clean, doesn't really give off many flavors, which makes it useful for us to use it for anything we want, more or less. You wouldn't reuse the yeast after that. So you can take the yeast back, repitch it, and it basically just keeps going if you take care of it. But for that one, it basically just wrecks the yeast. So it can do it, it just won't be doing anything after.
your honey gets converted completely?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the flavor is just...
So the flavor is there a little bit. And we also use honey malt. We use a little bit of honey malt, which makes it a little sweet. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of beer is also kind of perceived. And so this one in particular, you get that kind of sweetness to it, just a touch that's not too much for drinking a beer, but you kind of perceive that as the honey, which it's kind of cool to me. And every honey is different. We've done it two batches now, and we use different honey, and it came out pretty differently. So it's cool because it's good. We use great honey. But we're actually doing a project with someone, they're called Best Bees out of Boston, and they're basically like a bee lab, and they do this thing called honey DNA, which I really nerd out about. It's really cool. But they test the honey and they can tell you where it came from. And so, I'm really interested to see how this comes out, and then we can say, okay, well, we really liked this specific flower. Let's keep doing this. So, I don't know.
You can use our organic chemistry lab as testing.
Yes. I would love that. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.